All right. So the premise of our discussion today is really about the idea that your financial modeling, specifically how you design revenue, how money comes in, how people are going to pay you, how they think about how to pay you, is making a bunch of operating decisions for you. And many business owners don't understand that, or they haven't paid attention to it, or whatever. Some of you on this call are service providers. You provide various forms of advice or consultation to other businesses. And, my thesis has been, hey, if you really want to up your game for how you provide service to those, your ability to talk about the structure of their revenue, to speak in a revenue language, to speak in a financial language is has always been important. Many of you have heard me say that whoever talks about money first wins. So it has always been important, but it is all the more important now as sort of the economic uncertainties of what's going on in the world just sort of have increased volatility. Um, we've had some of these conversations in the Guild, K-shaped economy. I just did a piece last week that went out about it doesn't matter what your politics are, you're in a class war and how to think about that. People have money on the brain. I think that's sort of always true, but we're definitely in a stage where the how we think about money is having massive implications on a bunch of other downstream ideas. So that's really why I wanted to start talking about this. We've got a couple other potential sessions after this, but this is really the starting point for it. Um, we're going to start with basically four, a fifth kind of bonus basic models, and we're going to stick some familiar models underneath these, which will already begin to help people understand why things maybe are working the way they're working or not working. So the first is very straightforward. The first is a transactional model. A transactional revenue model is simply that people recognize a product. There's a clear boundary around I am buying this thing. This thing has a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes this thing is a physical object. Sometimes this thing is a clearly defined service. It is by definition productized, and I pay for it once and then I have it, and I don't have to pay for it again. Um, if it is a service, it usually is constrained to a period of time, so it doesn't have some of the implications of the retainer model. And it's really important to understand that under the transactional model, it can be high dollar or low dollar, right? So it does not matter whether it's an expensive product, like you're out there buying a Bentley, or whether you're buying a yo-yo at the gas station. Those are both transactional models because you're buying a thing once and then you have it. Now, what we've seen in recent years is that as the subscription model, which we'll talk about here in just a second, as subscription has become more and more faddish and is now on the back end of its fad, now there's a lot of cynicism about subscription, and we'll talk about that. But as subscription sort of moved into fad, then people in the transactional model, often pressurized by capital, try to do subscription-y things. So you saw this, for example, in the luxury car market where the car would have driving sensors, but you only got the driving sensors if you paid the driving sensor subscription. Um, as a part of your lease payment or something like that. So there was a movement increasingly, particularly as technology embedded itself in a lot of places, to add a subscription layer to a transactional thing. This is part of the subscription blowback that we're in the midst of that is probably going to be ongoing because in the marketplace is eventually crowds figure stuff out. And the marketplace was like, this kind of sucks. I just want to buy a thing and have it. And so you're seeing an increased interest from the marketplace in transactional buying and selling. Some of this is manifesting as the whole sort of going analog, right? People would rather buy a record than pay their Spotify membership. So that's some of what you're seeing. But I think that's less about the pricing model and more about the sense of ownership. Because the beauty of a transactional model is the once you buy it, then you have it. And when people buy from you in that way, you have to understand that that's embedded in the psychological relationship. Hey, once I buy it, then I have it. And you have to think about what that means then even for your contract design. Does your contract design make clear? Has your legal team or your lawyer that you use to help build your contracts really designed your contract in a way so that the transaction is clear? So, for example, I've seen over the years a lot of designer contracts that were not handled by lawyers that were made on, like downloaded from the internet or something, um, where it's not clear who owns the IP of the final product. The old school agency model was that the agency retained the ownership of the product. So the agency might retain the logo or might retain the artwork, and then they leased it to the client in perpetuity. You don't see a lot of that anymore. Now the expectation is that the client wants to own the artwork that they buy from the agency. But again, anytime you're in that transactional model, some level of ownership transfer is expected. Transactional also houses everything you're hearing in terms of productized services. So it's kind of a faddish phrase out there in the marketplace. A lot of consultants are talking about productized services. I, by and large, am a fan of some services being more productized and the benefits of that. Um, because if it's productized, it allows you to deliver in a transactional way. And so you get all the psychological benefits from your buyer of a transactional purchase. They feel like they own something, which feels more powerful. They get a sense of value from that. Um, Sellers tend to resist transactional because they are wooed by the mystical, magical world of endless um, guaranteed revenue, which really gets us into the next two models. This sort of like, yeah, but if I sell these other things, I will never have to sell anything again. I was just talking to a guy who's spinning up a consultancy, and out of 25 years in technology, got laid off out of a big firm because they're going to solve everything with AI, as I'm sure everyone is. Um, and he's spinning up a consultancy, and he was very honest with me. I've known him for many years, and the first thing he said to me was, the one thing about spinning up a consultancy that I'm worried about is selling. I'm like, well, I should tell you right now, Scott, consulting is selling. That is it. Consulting is selling. If you want to be a consultant, you are selling forever. Now you can learn to love that and learn to enjoy it and learn to not be so. I had to learn to love it. It took me a really long time to learn to love it. But because if you are afraid of selling, what you're going to do is you're going to give away money and power in your relationships to avoid selling. Because everything's a trade in an economic structure. And anytime you're in business, you're in an economic structure. So if you and I are hanging out and telling stories by the campfire and enjoying times together, that can be multiplicative and it can be exponential and it doesn't have to be a closed system. But businesses are closed systems. And so if you want more of one thing, you have to give some away of something else. Right. So if you as a seller want more security of like, hey, I just want to know I'm going to get paid forever and ever and ever, you have to give away something else, which is usually revenue. You just charge less because you want the security of getting paid forever and ever and ever. Or control, where you're sort of a downstream provider for your client, where you're sort of, they're the tail that wags the dog. So that gets us into subscription. Subscription really, obviously, its origin story is in media, right? Magazine subscriptions, cable TV subscriptions, right? It is a media-based model where I get access to a platform of something, and then I can a la carte what I want from that platform by virtue of paying my subscription. And subscription, when SaaS had its big rise, and Salesforce and HubSpot and all of these big SaaS companies, subscription became the answer for everything. And of course, we know why. Because at a base level, particularly in technology, the economics of subscription, when it's working, are astronomical because you have a fixed underlying cost. It costs X amount of money to build this cloud-based software, put it onto the cloud, and manage it, right? X amount of cost. You you don't have a very marginal per seat new costs. So every person you add to the software doesn't really add very much to your costs. That's the difference between what's called below the line costs and above the line costs. So below the line costs are fixed or relatively fixed. It's just what costs to do the business. And above the line costs increase on a per customer basis. Well, technology has notoriously low above the line costs. You put more people in technology, you buy people, more people buy your software, it doesn't cost you that much. Now, when it used to be delivered on CDs or had to be shopped in stores, right? Those above the line costs were higher. When all of it moved to cloud, all of a sudden the above the line costs of delivering software goes way down. And so the incentive, revenue is all about incentive. The incentive to sell to give people permanent license to things and sell on a per seat basis goes way up, right? Why wouldn't we want to sell on a per seat basis? Because the seats don't cost us anything. And selling transactionally, like Microsoft used to do, you'd buy Microsoft Office 95, right? And then you'd get the software and you own it. You actually, oh my gosh, you actually own something. It's amazing. And you can do whatever you want with it. And you don't have to wonder when they're going to stop taking care of you. You own the thing. And you can break it apart and you can put it back together. Well, that is so silly. Why would anyone want to own anything? We would all love to be renters on someone else's land forever. Thus, subscription and cloud, of course, made subscription so easy and so financially attractive from a selling standpoint. And because most subscription technology businesses were venture backed, they were paid for by somebody else's money. Somebody else's money is always risk capital. There's no passion to it. Right now, they might be more interested in business A versus business B, but for the most part, outside money is risk capital. They're paying to absorb some of your risk. So they want risk-related returns. And risk-related returns get bigger and bigger and bigger the longer the risk goes. So people get really mad about like, well, gosh, how much money do these people need? And why do they need 13x and 15x and 20x on whatever? Because they did what all risk capital does. They put money somewhere and that money disappeared. So imagine taking $1 million that you have and that money disappears and you may never get it back. Well, the longer that money is gone, what do you expect of it? Bigger and bigger and bigger returns, right? Because it's risk capital. You're not bringing anything to the party other than risk. So you're expecting to get paid for risk. Well, of these models, if assuming they're all working, and some of these are not working as well as others, of these models, the best way to get paid back for risk is with subscription, which is why subscription became so powerful. Now, as subscription became more powerful, everybody's like, oh, okay. And the other reason why people like subscription is it takes big numbers and makes them smaller. And this is a classic strategy, right? Instead of saying, oh, you're going to pay $1 million for your HubSpot, what they're going to say is, you're going to pay $119 per seat per month for 7 years. And maybe you'll sit down and do the math of what $119 per seat per month for 7 years does. But they're like, hey, we're locking you in for 7 years. That means you can't get price increases. That means we can't charge you more. And the software is going to get so much better over that time because clearly software definitely gets better over time. We definitely know that, right? And so it makes big numbers seem small, which is another reason why subscription became as powerful as it is. Now, you can tell in my intonation, and I'm sure from your own experience, that there's an enormous subscription backlash in the marketplace because it didn't work out to be a very consumer-friendly model by and large, except potentially in media, right? Nobody's super mad about their Netflix subscription. They're a little bit mad because it gets more expensive every year. But you can go on to Netflix and go, well, but they dropped five new shows last month. I'm going to drop another 5 new shows next month, and they have enough content to incentivize you to keep going. You have to run a really successful media operation to make this work. Now, I want you to start to see how some sort of cultural trends happened, because about the same time subscription gets really popular, the marketing language around, well, everybody needs to be a media company also becomes popular. as subscription becomes popular, everybody needs to be a media company. You need video content, you need written content, you need blogs, you need this, you need how-tos, you need free access webinars, right? Because subscription is genetically built for media. It works the best with media, right? I don't worry about my New Yorker subscription because the New Yorker keeps showing up and it's new every time it shows up. So I feel validated in the money that I'm spending. Very few things do a good job of feeling like that. And so it's very difficult to build something that constantly validates me as a buyer spending every month, no matter how small that spending is. And the way people solve for that is, oh, well, we'll just be cheap, right? So then it doesn't feel as bad to write the check so that I don't have to deliver as much content. So this idea, and I know we've got some content people either watching this later or watching it right now, the idea of the meteoric rise of content as the primary engine of how business gets done is tied to external factors. It's not just because content, by and large, is a sort of neutral good, right? It's not necessarily a neutral good. It could be bad. It could be distracting. It could be a problem. It could be noisy. It could be all of these things. Content became essential the more things were paid by subscription because content is the easiest way to say, look, we gave you new stuff. Or we gave you access to new stuff that you didn't have, other people don't have access to, or you have a little passworded gateway where there's shiny new objects that show up, right? And so anything that is subscription based has to live and die by the demands of a subscription buyer, which is where's my shiny new stuff? Now that gets us to retainer. And retainer is basically subscription, except you're delivering humans. So a retainer is services, um, consulting. It's access to sort of a human element that's, delivered in a per month or per quarter or subscription style pricing model. There might be deliverables attached. There might be, hey, you're going to consistently get these things, or at the end of the retainer, we're going to deliver these sort of summarizing products. The more that there's deliverables attached at particular time constraints, the more retainer starts to smell like transactional, which is a good smell, which starts to smell like transactional, which gets people to be more willing to do it. The less there's a regular cadence of this is what you're going to get, the more you're functionally selling hours. That retainers at their core identity, their core function, is very difficult for them to graduate beyond selling hours. A lot of the retainers come out of the agency model. You get this much of this type of a worker, this much of this type of a worker, this much of this type of a worker, and we'll give you sort of an omnibus pricing that's a little less than all of their individual prices together because sometimes you'll need more or less and we can shave some off the top. But at the end of the day, you're selling access to humans. And the easiest way to price to sell access to humans is hourly. Now, most people, ironically, who sell retainers hate hourly. They're like, oh, I don't do hourly. I do retainer. Ma'am, you do hourly, just in big chunks. Because the way that you got to the price of that retainer is by calculating how many hours you think people would need to work to do the retainer. So you are selling hourly. It's also really important to understand that in almost every case, there are a few exceptions of people who do this very, very well. It's a different webinar for a different day. But in almost every case, fractional is just a very sexy version of retainer, which is a very sexy version of hourly. So most fractional work is just hourly. Now it's packaged in a certain way, and we put little buzzwords into the scope of work. But at the end of the day, what you're selling is a per hour access. I know some very successful, like fractional COOs, fractional CFOs, people who sell this at scale. And when I ask them, well, how do you decide how much to charge the client? Oh, well, I just think about how much of my week it's going to take up and how much room I have for other clients. I'm like, oh, so hourly, right? But they don't want to feel like lawyers. They don't want to feel like accountants. So they do hourly, they do this retainer packaging instead. Now, I've been picking on retainer. It's not bad. I've sold retainers, done a lot of retainers in my life. It's just you have to really understand the dynamics of the buying and selling relationship. That as soon as you build it around that type of revenue, around the retainer style revenue, it sets an expectation. Now, I've successfully had retainer relationships where no one was counting my hours, but that was all very, very, very intentional in terms of how I built it, what I committed to, what they said they could expect from me, and what I said they couldn't expect from me. And it goes all the way down to what level of access you allow. Are you going to be on a Slack channel that they can visibly see? Like all of these very minute details have an enormous impact on how people think about retainer. Retainer is also tainted increasingly by people's resistance around subscription because inevitably what happens with retainer is people go, well, what did I buy again? And the contempt of the familiar eventually takes over because humans aren't content. So even clients who I've worked with for years and who I love and they love me, eventually at some point in the retainer relationship, they're like, what are you doing here again? Like, why did we hire you? What? And I'm doing all the same stuff I've always done, right? But the contempt of the familiar has taken over, and that degrades the value of the retainer. And you'll start to feel it as a service provider. At some point, you're going to be like, I can tell they're getting tired of me. What I got any new stuff? Got any new whiz bang ideas? Got any new flashy things I can bring to the party? Because I can start to feel that decay. It's not because you did anything wrong. It's not because it's not even that they're unhappy with you. It's just it's very difficult to retain because humans are not content. So you can't go drop a bunch of new episodes on the Peter Barber Netflix channel and expect people to keep paying, right? Because they're paying for you. And the more they get to know you, the more, ironically, like all humans, you're the same. You're the same as you were last year and the year before that and the year before that. Now you probably got smarter and you have some slightly more nuanced ideas, and you're probably smarter about them because you know them better and there's some upsides to that. But displaying that in a way that makes people write checks is a very real challenge. And I suppose this is a really good opportunity to pause and talk about that is the job of running a business. I don't mean to be trite here, but I've talked to so many people that are very like offended by this. The job of a business is to deliver and display value in a way that makes people write checks. So this sort of like weepy milieu that we're starting to see more and more of like, well, no one likes what I have and I love this, but no one wants to buy it anymore. And that kind of thing that's showing up everywhere. I mean, you hear the AI guys going on, be like, why don't people appreciate the salvific thing that we're bringing to the world to change? No one wants to buy our world-changing thing. It's so unfair. This whole thing is a fundamental misunderstanding of how commerce works. Commerce is making a thing that is valuable enough that people want to give you money. I don't mean to be crass or sound silly, but the level to which increasingly people don't understand this. And if people don't want to give you money, there is only one of two problems. Either the thing you're giving them is not valuable to them, or they don't understand its value, right? You either have a product problem, which is the thing isn't valuable, or you have a communication problem, which is they can't see or relate to or connect to the value, either because they don't know you exist or your messaging is bad or whatever. And for that, the marketers can solve for. But we get back to retainer. The longer you're in a retainer, the harder it is for everybody to go, this is what we bought and this is what we're getting for what we bought, and we feel good about it. So I always think about retainers in chunks, 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18. If you're at 24 months on a retainer, things are starting to get weird in most cases, unless you've really dynamically changed your services over the time or unless you can show results. And if you can clearly show results over a 24-month period of time, I would argue that where you really belong is outcome based. That if you can say, I did this thing for you, and because of this thing, here are the clearly demonstrable results of the thing, then you should be selling in a way where you get some of the spoils of the results. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. Now, the sort of the classically brains go to like proving ROI of marketing efforts and stuff like that. This is not a proving ROI podcast. We're not going to go into that. We're not going to get lost in that weird attribution chaos. But what I mean is, if you have taken over, or you are clearly directionally responsible for a major aspect of their business outcomes. I see Peter on the call. You're doing all of their fundraising, right? And over the period of time that you're doing all of their fundraising, they are demonstrably raising more funds, right? That is an opportunity in perhaps a future relationship to do outcome based, right? Where there's a clear correlation between your activity and the results. If you're going to build a product for them, you're going to design a product, you're going to package it, you're going to figure out the go-to market, you're going to hold the hands of the whole team to take that product out into the world. It's not unrealistic to say, well, that product sort of holds some of my personal IP of what I know in the world. And so I want a piece of it. If you're going to sell them for $10, I want 50 cents of every $10, right? There's an outcome-based element to that. Outcome-based, I think, is the most powerful way for businesses and providers to align because incentives are aligned. And the more incentives are aligned, the more everybody's having a good time. When incentives, and that's part of the reason, to just speak full circle, why transactional historically is so powerful. Because incentives are aligned. Now they aren't literally we have the same incentives, but we both want the same thing from the thing. I want to make a thing that you want to buy. You want to buy a thing that I want to make. And the more I want to make it, the more you want to buy it. And the more you want to buy it, the more a healthy transactional relationship has very aligned incentives. Because I benefit from making a better thing, because then I can charge more money for it and I can sell it to you and etc. And you benefit from me making a better thing because then you, shocker, get a better thing, right? Now that is even tighter in alignment in outcome based, because it means that you get compensated based on what makes the business happy, whatever that is. Usually it's money, but it might be staff retention, it might be churn, it might be operational efficiency, it might be reducing, like if you're an AI person, you're going to come in and go, hey, we're going to reduce your overall tech spend by building in automations and removing licenses you don't need. You're going to say, well, I'm going to remove $10,000 a month worth of licenses for you. And so by virtue of that, I want to get paid the first two of those 10 months. So my invoice is $20,000. And for every percentage of $10,000 that I don't get for you, if I only get $8,000, then I'll only get paid 16, right? So you can create these outcome-based pricing models, and you'll notice when you're selling in an outcome-based way that your prices go up, you can charge way more, and because you're taking on risk. Risk is always worth money. This is why I'm always coaching our independent contractors and consultants in our community to take on more risk, because you know what you get to charge more for all the time? Risk. If you want to safely sell the safest thing in your safe little corner and wait for people to knock on your door and say, please, can I buy your very safe thing? Yeah, it's going to be commoditized, and you're going to have to be cheap, and you're going to have to sell a lot of it, and you're probably going to have to, buy an older car. Um, because the revenue just isn't there. People pay for risk. And the beauty of outcome based is you're then taking on the same risks that the customer is taking on, and people love that. Okay. Hybrid is a mix, right? And a lot of businesses are a mix. They have some retainer elements, they have some subscription elements. Maybe you're paying for platform access, which is more of a subscription style price, but then you're layering a service on top of it that's sold in a transactional way. Hybrid's fine. Remember, it creates confusion, right? And confusion is the number one enemy of sales. Nothing is more oppositional to sales than confusion. So hybrid can be great, but the more confusing it is, the harder it is to sell. So I always try to encourage people in their go-to-market motion is sell the least confusing thing first. Then once they get to know you, they'll accept some complexity because now you, the access to you or to your team or to your product or service or whatever, you are now the salve for that confusion. It doesn't take away the reverse pressure of confusion. Confusion always is a sales reducing pressure. Um, but it does absorb some of it. It's like a shock absorber on the ride. The more that they have access to you, but always sell the least confusing thing first. Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes here and speed through some impact of this in a chart, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A afterward. So what does all this mean? Okay, so, and for those of you who are in the guild, we'll drop this into the thread and you can have it after. So what model you choose has massive implications across all of the areas of your business. This is the thesis, really the thesis of this entire discussion. If we were going to do it in a longer 2 or 3 or 4 hour training, for which I would need money. Just to be clear, I also sell things for money. But we'll hit the high points here. The transactional model, right? So the go-to-market motion is generally volume and to some degree advertising based. Now, I'm going to use advertising in the broadest sense of the word. Advertising is any content that is produced one to many to induce buying behavior. Any content that is produced one to many to induce buying behavior. So posting on LinkedIn, advertising. Having a Substack that talks about why your service works, advertising. Putting stuff on your webpage that gives people value so they have a reason to come to your webpage, advertising. There was a recent article, and I don't remember the link for it, but I'll find it, that basically made the very strong case. It was from Vulture, actually, I just remembered, that 90% of what's happening on the platforms today is advertising. Now, some of it's very sophisticated and obfuscated, so it doesn't look like advertising, doesn't feel like advertising, but 90% of what's happening on the platforms is advertising. So if you're doing transactional, you have to do advertising. And I don't care if you're selling a $50,000 service or a $10,000, you have to do advertising. You have to have a motion that says, hey, I'm doing a thing you should buy from me. There was a time, a very brief fantasy, that you could do transactional work and have it be primarily inbound. Now, inbound is similar to other things you've heard of, like unicorns or life on Mars, right? Things that are completely imaginary and don't actually exist. Inbound is a thing that doesn't actually exist. Referrals exist, partnerships exist. Lots of things exist that produce relationship-based activity. Inbound does not exist. And so people have tried to do transactional with inbound, just saying, hey, I'm here. Wouldn't you love to find me? And boy, does that not work. Okay. The transactional then, but we do tend to have a sales profile that has minimal human contact. Because you're doing transactional, you always have to be selling. You're always selling, right? Because you're selling a thing and then they're done with it and you have to sell another thing. And you're selling a thing and then they're done with it and you have to sell another thing. So if you're doing transactional, again, that includes $50,000 service packages. We want to sell with minimal human contact. So you want to build an onboarding system that says, okay, we're going to agree in 2 meetings that we're working together or we don't. Right. So that's why I recommend people have a nice transactional, simple front end to their more complex services. So you can decide with this client, hey, we're working together or not. Let's have 2 conversations and either you're on the board or you're off. And if it takes 7 conversations to do it, then you're not doing transactional. You're blowing up your transactional business. Your key metrics there is the cost of acquisition payback, whole other conversation about cost of acquisition. That needs to include all of the soft operational cost of acquisition to the client. Your hours, your brain power sitting there writing the newsletter, the people you pay to distribute your content, all of that soft acquisitional cost, all of that is acquisitional cost, not just your ad spend. Most people, particularly agencies, measure the cost of acquisition in the cheapest possible way. It's just like the hard cost of ad spend plus the retainer. That is not the cost of acquisition. The cost of acquisition is much larger than that. So your key metric there is going to be cost of acquisition payback. Your cash flow is going to be high up front, but it's smoother or at worst seasonal. So you got to spend some money up front to create the flow, right? You have to have an advertising motion to create the flow. Then it creates a smoother, or at worst case, seasonal, right? I pick up some stuff at the beginning of the year. I pick up some stuff in September when people come out of their holiday fog, whatever it might be. Your P&L impacts, you're going to have a high cost of acquisition. So your per unit cost of sales is higher, um, particularly initially. Because it just costs more to sell when you're doing transactional because you're having to sell all the time. Um, and sometimes you're going to have a high operating cost, the cost of goods sold. So that really is dependent on what the pricing of your model is, and because those are both percentage-based factors, so that's a different class for a different time. You can read the hiring implications. The trust dynamic here is to sell in a low trust way. A lot of people are trying to do transactional sales because their product is transactional, and they're trying to do it in a high trust way, and they're burning themselves out. So they're trying to do all this high trust, high trust, high trust work, and it's too exhausting because you got to sell. So if you have to do a bunch of high trust work to sell your transactional thing is too expensive and too complicated. So you need to simplify it, shrink it, or really embed it in a core audience, right? Obviously, you can charge more money for a transactional thing if it clearly delivers value to a very clear, specific audience. That there's upward price pressure on that as well. And then market resistance. The big challenge here is the level of advertising noise. So there's so much advertising, particularly digital, very, very difficult to break through that noise. All right, subscription. The general model here is land and expand. So again, a lot of people are trying to do subscription in a way where it's like, oh, I want everyone to subscribe to my $700 a month subscription, and that's my entry-level product. That's not how subscription works. It's never going to work that way, right? Think about Netflix, right? Netflix wants you to subscribe for the $7.99 version where you still have to watch all those terrible ads, right? The other thing that people make mistake from a go-to-market motion with subscription is they technically run two parallel go-to markets. They have a cheap version and an expensive version. They're like, well, some people can't afford my expensive version, but that's not a go-to market. Those two different markets. Now you're selling to the cheap people in one way, and then you're selling to the expensive people in a different way, which basically means you're running two businesses at the same time. This isn't subscription based, but it makes the point. I was talking to a brilliant entrepreneur yesterday. She runs a business in the hospitality space, events, hospitality. And she started her business on like a small scale events, like really high end boutique sort of women's luncheons and things like that. But her margins were terrible because it took so much work to build that. And then eventually she sold her way in because all business is selling. She sold her way into higher end hotel events, multi-day kind of a thing where she had much higher margins and a much more reasonable cost of goods sold. And we brainstormed a little bit about, well, should she keep both businesses? And I said, well, we have to remember that the cheap business is not an entry point to the expensive business. They're two businesses. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have both. It's what I always refer to as the 11 Madison Park Shake Shack business. Both those businesses are owned and managed by the same people, or at least they used to be. I think Shake Shack finally got sold. But in the initial state, they were both run by the same business, and they had the credibility of 11 Madison Park. Great ingredients, great sourcing, farm to table, etc. But they had the capacity, because they had a lot of money, they had the capacity to run two very different businesses with shared credibility, but they are two different businesses. Subscription is land and expand. So you get a little bit, and then you get a little bit more in the subscription, then you get a little bit more in the subscription. To do that, of course, you have to have increasing levels of value. So the sales premium there is like a freemium and then a minor consultative and then there's a moderate lead time there. It can depend a lot on price. The minor consultative there is in reference to you can afford some consultative sales. You can have a little bit of consultation in the sales motion, but not very much. Because again, to make subscription work, you usually have to do it at volume. And again, subscription is licensing access to something. It's not selling human services. That's retainer, which we'll get to in just a second. Obviously, your key metrics here are churn, lifetime value of the client. There's a high upfront to the cash flow because you got to build the thing that you're giving access to. So there's a platform cost. You got to build the platform that people want, get access to it. Usually you're providing discounted access at the beginning, so you're not making enough to cover the cost of the platform. So you got to have some capital up front to make that work. But if you do it right, there's potentially widening margins over time, right? The margins keep getting better and better and better and better as time goes on. High investment in sales, but the thing that people miss, and I've made this mistake, the thing people miss about subscription, you got to have a really good customer service CS motion. So you have to invest in a thing that makes people feel good to be a part of whatever they're subscribing to be a part of. That is required, and a little AI chatbot's not going to do it. Um, you got some higher trust demand more than it used to be. That's what I mean by higher trust demand. The trust level on subscription used to be terribly low. It'd be like, ah, sure, I'll spend $50 a month and try that. The I'll spend $50 a month and try that is gone. Everybody's broke, right? So they really have to understand the value delivery of what you're doing. There's a higher trust demand for that, and that the demand of trust for it increases over time because people are like, well, is it still good? Is it getting better? Do I still like it? Do I still want to be a part of this? Because people churn out and more and more. And then obviously we talked a little bit about the market resistance. Quickly on retainer, the go-to-market motion here is really relationships and outbound. I find amazing the number of people that are trying to primarily use content to be their market engine for retainers. The content can be in the mix, but content is a very tough go-to-market motion for retainer. It just is. So what you want is more of a hunter sales profile, either a founder or a high quality salesperson who knows exactly what they're looking for, exactly who they want to go talk to, and finds ways to go talk to them with a highly consultative sales motion. And then, of course, you have more moderate or extended lead times if you're selling retainers. A lot of times with founders who just don't have it in them to do the hunter sales motion, those are the folks that I'm like, hey, you got to go over here and do transactional. Right. If you're not willing to do the hunter sales model, you're going to have to figure out transactional as a front end. Because again, revenue makes all these decisions for you. Key metrics, utilization, because how much of your time, if you're the founder, or your team's time are you using to actually deliver the retainer service? So utilization is always another way to measure that is revenue per head count. In retainer-based businesses, if you have employees, it's revenue per head count because you're using up humans to deliver the subscription. So we want to figure out how much money are we making. And really strong businesses of this have a hard number. They're like, okay, we have to be making, because our average cost of employee is $70,000. Our average cost of employee is $100,000, including benefits. Then we need to be making $200,000 per employee or whatever it is. I actually encourage solos to think in revenue per headcount ways. Some of you have heard me say this, that you need to take whatever you're going to pay yourself if you're a solo and then double it. And that's your target revenue, your minimum target revenue. Whatever you're going to pay yourself, doubled. So that way you have some money for ebb and flow. You have some money to invest back into yourself. You have some money for advertising and all of the things. All right, really quick here because we're almost out or past time here, but P&L effects, this is just retainers a low margin business forever. It just is because of the way it's designed. You also have a low revenue ceiling because you can only do as much as your humans can do. So you can keep adding more humans, but then you're going to add more complexity, and complexity is expensive. So retainers have a ceiling that you butt up against. And then really quickly on outcome based, obviously this is totally relationship but authority based. You have to have a clear externally facing source of authority. Yes, case studies, although people are increasingly sort of suspect about case studies because of AI and whatever. Obviously materials of authority, a book, some other sort of clear content engine that shows people what you know. From a sales perspective, you're the evangelist. I am out here proving to the world that I know what the F I'm doing, and you should listen to me. And then as people listen to you, they're like, oh, well, can I pay you? Sure. A lot of money. You can pay me a lot of money. Obviously, utilization comes in play here. This is very volatile because so you have to have a risk hunger. If you can't do risk, you can't do outcome based. Just because it's very risk forward. But you do have potential for 3 or 4 times the EBITDA, the earnings before income, depreciation, taxes, and the A I just forgot. You have much higher multiple over other models here in terms of what you can make. This tends to be very founder driven, um, and operates based on what the founder can do. So for the recording, we're going to stop here on the recording officially. Thanks everybody for joining us. And then for people on the call, feel free to stick around. And if you have further questions about this, you guys all know how to reach me and send me a message. And we're going to do some more of these. So send me messages about what you want to learn about. All right. I'll leave the share up, but let me stop the recording here. And then we'll open up the floor for questions.